Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. This is going to be a series where we go through each Grand Prix weekend and review the results of the race. Let's get into things. Let's have a quick look at the qualifying results before we get into things. Lance Stroll was the only driver to not set a time due to his crash with Latifi on his outlap. I think Lance was mostly to blame for this after turning in on Latifi. He clearly didn't see him in his rear mirrors. Sebastian Vettel had a weekend to forget, not getting out of Q1, and Mick Schumacher beating teammate Kevin Magnussen. Alex Albon was the other driver to not get out of Q1. Pierre Gasly, Bottas, Tsunoda, Zhou Guanyu and Mick Schumacher were the drivers to get into Q2. Fernando Alonso was on an absolute rapid lap before crashing. He had a purple middle sector. Carlos Sainz set a really poor lap and just missed his final lap cut off due to the timings. Ocon 8th, Daniel Ricciardo 7th and Lando Norris in P4 with the two Mercedes sandwiched between them. Sergio Perez only 1/10 behind his teammate Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc on pole. So before going into the individual driver ratings, let's have a quick look at the race results. Carlos Sainz, Sebastian Vettel and Max Verstappen were the 3 cars to DNF. Fernando Alonso, after a positive start, finished back at the grid. Charles Leclerc was the winner with Sergio Perez and George Russell on podiums, and the McLarens had a much better weekend. So Charles Leclerc is going to be the first driver we're going to look at, qualifying in first place and winning the race by an absolute country mile. He looked in control this whole race and looked easy for him. Max Verstappen had a few chances to get past on the safety car, but after a few laps, Charles Leclerc pushed away quite comfortably. For this, I'm giving Charles a 10 out of 10. I think this was a weekend to forget for Sainz. He seemed a bit frustrated. He had problems at the start with his steering wheel after having to change last minute and couldn't seem to get the car off the grid at the start. He spun on lap 2 after trying to overtake Mick Schumacher, and overall it's just a weekend to forget for him. I've given Carlos a 3 out of 10 and he needs to step up if he wants to complete Leclerc this season. Another frustrating weekend for Red Bull and Max Verstappen. There's 2 races out of the 3 that he hasn't managed to finish now. Neither were his fault and that's why I've given him an 8 out of 10. Fairly solid drive for the majority of the race. Couldn't seem to get past Leclerc, but I think that's just due to the dominance of the Ferrari at the current moment in time. Another great weekend from Checo. I'm going to give him a 9 out of 10. Qualified in 3rd, following on from his brilliant pole in Saudi Arabia. Finishing the race in 2nd, mainly due to Max Verstappen DNFing, as I don't think he would have got past, but he was there to pick up the points for Red Bull. He also had a good overtake on Hamilton and Russell during the race. Mercedes seem to slowly be getting back to where they were, although they're still a way off the Red Bulls and the Ferraris. Hamilton qualified in 5th and finished the race in 4th, so I've given him a 7 out of 10. This was much better than Saudi Arabia, and he seemed to had better pace than George Russell compared to that race. But I still think there's room for improvement with both of these drivers, and I think they're going to be more dominant towards the end of the season. Hamilton, a 7 out of 10, I've given George an 8 out of 10. Qualifying behind him is 6th, but he actually finished the race in 3rd place and managed to get on the podium. This was mainly due to Hamilton getting unlucky with safety cars and George benefiting from this, but nevertheless, this is a great result for George and his first podium for Mercedes. A much better weekend for both McLaren drivers. I've given Lando an 8 out of 10 for this weekend. Qualified in 4th, which is really strong considering they probably have the 4th or 5th quickest car currently. Lando said that in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain that the car hasn't got any quicker, it's the same car, it's just this track is more suited to that car at the moment. Daniel Ricciardo, his home race, I've given a 7, 1 point below Lando. Qualifying in 7th and finishing 6th, a point behind Lando. He seemed to just be behind him all weekend, couldn't seem to get past, but it was comfortable, they seemed quite close together, and I think Daniel Ricciardo will be happy with this result at the moment. So this was a really difficult one. I wanted to give him a 10 out of 10 as in quali, he was looking fastest, but then also he finished last. Qualified 10th, which I believe is the bottom at Q3 after crashing. Finished race in 17th, which is technically last place. I've given Fernando Alonso an 8 out of 10, I think this is fair. He's really struggled this weekend, but also shows so much potential. The crash in Q3 wasn't his fault. He had a gearbox issue and he locked up into 4th gear and couldn't slow the car down. Esteban Ocon didn't show as much potential as Fernando Alonso, but I think he executed him much better. Qualifying in 8th, I think, was a bit overlooked, and finishing the result in 7th, I think that's a very strong result for the Alpines. I've also given him an 8 out of 10. You might think this is unfair, as he's finished much higher, but I think Fernando Alonso, without the issues, would have finished and put the car much higher on the grid at the end of the race. Valtteri Bottas wasn't looking as quick for the Alfa Romeos this weekend. He was the race winner in the last Melbourne Grand Prix, qualified in 12th pace and finished the race 8th. He had a few good overtakes, especially one on Tsunoda, and I've given him 7 out of 10 for this race. It was a fairly uneventful race for the rookie Zhou Guanyu, qualifying in 14th and finishing one place off the points in 11th. I think this is sort of respectively where I think he can fight for most of this season, and he'll think he'll be scrapping in the midfield for a few points in most races. Kevin Magnussen was one of the few drivers to start on the hard tyre compound, so the mid-race safety cars didn't really help his strategy. Qualified in 17th, started the race in 16th and finished on 14th. Seemed kind of off the pace the whole weekend, although I know he was suffering with a bit of illness. He also went off the track trying to get past the AlphaTauris at one point. I've given him a 5 out of 10. It's nice to see Mick doing well after the big crash he had at Saudi Arabia, and also seeing him racing against a respectable teammate in Kevin Magnussen. Qualified 15th and finished the race 13th, so out of the points for both Haas drivers, but I think this shows that Mick Schumacher is a really good driver, and he definitely has the potential for this Haas car. He also nearly crashed into Tsunoda into the safety car, taking off his front wing, but managed to avoid it by a split second. I've given Mick a 7 out of 10 for this weekend. Pierre Gasly qualified in 11th and managed to wake his way up to 9th in the race. It's strange seeing Gasly not sort of putting in monster quali laps, sort of fairly quiet in qualifying this year, but I think 9th is sort of a respectable position of where he was during this race. I've given him a 7 out of 10. I think this was solid to get points for the AlphaTauri, although they seem like they've dropped off a bit from last year, and they've definitely got a lot of pace to make up. Yuki Tsunoda's had a really strong start to the season, but starting the race in 15th and qualifying in 13th, I think it's quite poor from this driver, and I think he's definitely got a lot more potential. He seems to have eliminated a lot of the mistakes from his driving, but he needs to up his pace if he's going to compete with Gasly this year. I've given Tsunoda a 5 out of 10. What a race it was for Alex Albon, giving him a 9 out of 10 for getting points with the Williams. It would have been a 10, but I think there's always room for improvement, and you can't even give it a 10 for 1 point no matter what car you're in. Qualified in 16th, although he started at the back of the grid for a disqualification from qualifying from a fuel issue. Finished race in 10th, gaining 1 point for Williams, which seems vital with their fight with Aston Martin at the back of the grid this year. He had 57 out of the 58 laps on the hard tyre, and he said that his tyres just keep getting better and better. This is a great weekend for Albon and Williams. After a silly crash in Saudi Arabia last weekend, I think Nicholas Latifi needed to improve, and I don't think he did. He qualified in 19th and finished the race 16th, 1 point off from last. I've given him 3 out of 10, and I think he really needs to improve if he wants to keep his seat next year. I know he's a paid driver, but I can't see Williams gaining anything from this if people like Albon are able to finish 10th, and he just didn't nowhere near him. He's also had a few incidents. I don't think the crash with Stroll this race was his fault, but he seems to be a magnet for incidents, and I think with all the talent coming through, Williams need to make a big decision if they want to keep him on for next year. It was great to see Vettel back, although this is probably a weekend to forget for him. Probably one of the worst weekends in his Formula 1 career. I have to give him a 1 out of 10. I don't think things could have gone any worse. The incidents in practice, not getting hardly any time in the car, qualifying 18th, crashing, not finishing the race, went off at turn 11 and crashed going out of turn 4. This was just an awful weekend for the 4-time world champion, and he just seems a bit fed up. It'd be interesting to see his sort of motivation throughout the rest of the season, but it doesn't look high at the moment. This was a very eventful weekend for Lance Stroll, and I've given him a 4 out of 10. Qualifying didn't go well, 20th. He managed to get to 12th place in the race, which I think is fairly respectable for the car he's driving at the moment. He got a 3-place grid drop for a crash with Latifi. I think this is fully deserved. I think it was his fault. I don't think Latifi had too much to blame. If you as a car going past you, you think you should be aware of it and not turning on them. He also got given a 5-second penalty for weaving down the straight. I think for his experience this was just a silly mistake to do, although it didn't really seem to affect his position towards the end of the race. He pushed Bottas off the track, which could have got him a penalty at a different circuit, but he also did a lot of good defending during the race. It's worth noting he's on 5 penalty points before this race, so he might be getting a grid drop soon, and it's worth keeping an eye on. Let's have a look at the drivers of the day, loser of the day, team win, team loss. Driver of the day, I'd have to give this to Leclerc. He had an absolutely faultless race and qualifying, finishing pole, setting the fastest lap, and coming first by over 15 seconds. He looked dominant, he never really looked in trouble, and it's scary to look how fast that he looked in that car. Loser of the day, I think a few drivers could have been up for this. Max Verstappen for not finishing the race again, as well as Carlos Sainz, Leclerc's teammate, for crashing and just generally not having a good weekend. But I think the real loser was Sebastian Vettel. He just looked off it, didn't look great, and I can't see him staying at Aston Martin for much longer if this is what his races are going to be like. Team win, there's a few teams that performed sort of above and beyond this weekend. I'd have to give it to McLaren. I think if you told them they were going to finish 5th and 6th, sort of had the 3rd fastest car, they would have taken it this weekend. There are a few other teams that could have been up for this. Williams getting a point, Ferrari extending their lead at the championship, which is more than Verstappen or Hamilton had in the championship last season, or Mercedes. They probably overperformed for the 3rd race in a row, so I think they'll be happy with this weekend. Team out, I'm going to have to give this to Red Bull, mainly due to the driver championship. Max Verstappen DNFing for 2 of the 3 first races. This is a massive hindrance to his 2nd world title, and I think this is going to play a major part in the final result. He's already miles behind Charles Leclerc. So let's have a quick look at the overall driver standing. Charles Leclerc leading by 34 points. This is massive. He's almost double what George Russell's on, and if he can keep it up at this rate, he's going to start pushing away before we know it. George Russell in P2, I think he's over-delivering in this Mercedes, but I think as soon as drivers such as Max Verstappen, Carlos Sainz are having more reliability, he's going to drop down this order. Like I said, Carlos Sainz 3rd, Perez 4th, Hamilton 5th. I think we can expect Hamilton to sort of get into at least top 3 in the next coming races. Esteban Ocon P7, I think that's very respectable, and the 2 McLarens, Lando and Daniel Ricciardo, in 8th and 11th, gaining points this weekend. Kevin Magnussen in 9th, Bottas 10th, Gasly and Tsunoda in 12th and 13th, with Fernando Alonso, Guan Yu Zhou and Alex Albon, the remaining drivers with points. Mick Schumacher, Stroll, Latifi and Vettel yet to score points, although I can expect Mick Schumacher and Lance Stroll to sort of get some points in the next coming races. The other 2, I'm not so sure. Ferrari absolutely flying away in 1st position on 104 points. Mercedes and Red Bull quite close in 2nd and 3rd place, with McLaren getting points putting them 4th and Alpine in 5th. Alfa Romeo, Haas and AlphaTauri I can sort of see fighting for the low midfield for points, and Williams and Aston Martin are going to be fighting for 9th place, with Williams getting a crucial 1 point during the Melbourne Grand Prix. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'm going to be doing this after every Grand Prix weekend, so if you could subscribe and like the video, it would help massively. I'm trying to grow this channel, so any views, comments and subs would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, and see you in the next one.